Good morning, everybody. My name is David Simpson. I'm one of the instructors here at Themis, and we're here today to hear from Tom Dunlap about Liberty Profile inside of CICS. So welcome to the webinar. I want to introduce Tom. Tom is one of the most experienced guys I know with CICS. He's been working with CICS from the beginning. And at Themis, he's been instrumental in modernizing our CICS curriculum. He's taught a lot of CICS web services. And lately, we're developing course material for Liberty Profile. So welcome you today. And also, the link to the slides is on the screen right now. So if you go to our website, themisinc.com/webinars, you can not only see signups for future webinars, replays of past webinars, but also right at the top should be a link where you can download a PDF of the slides from today's presentation. So I encourage you to go out and grab those, and you can follow.
All right, thank you, David. Well, welcome everyone. And again, questions are accepted. In the question tab, I just have to open it up so I can see it myself. Do jot down my email, because beyond the next hour here, if you've got questions, I encourage people to send me emails. I do answer them. So let's get moving, because a lot of stuff to cover. Try to give you a complete cookbook way of doing this, if you will, in a short period of time. So let's quickly talk about what Liberty Profile is. And again, if you download the slide, you'll see there's text associated with it too. All right, so in CSS TS 5.1, IBM put WAS Liberty Profile back inside of CICS. So I don't have to run it externally. It's embedded in several other products also, okay? What is it? Well, complete Java server. Runs Java applications, servlets, as it comes out of the box, but it can be configured to support full Java beans, enterprise Java beans, whatever. The whole idea behind Liberty Profile was the stripped down form of WAS that was out there, the full network distribution version, so that it was like smaller, lighter, more compact. But we can now grow it, if you will, to what it was, full EE support, Java EE. But for most cases inside of CICS, all you care about is applications and servlets, okay? It does have connectors, as you can see on the slide, so I can do links to COBOL. Also has a full HTTP web server, so you can have web pages served up, the whole complete bit, if you will. I think in the text also mentions it works with like Java server faces also, so. Anything you want to do pretty much can be done. Not only can I link to CSS COBOL programs, but with CSS TS 5.4, they introduced a feature called Link to Liberty, where your standard CSS COBOL programs can link to a program running inside of a Liberty Profile, okay? So kind of moving on here, a little bit broader picture, if you will. So we can have JavaKicks applications. JavaKicks, JKicks, if you will, as you see it on the screen, is equivalent to command level programs that you might write in COBOL, but it also does have other interfaces for standard Java stuff, like we can talk to JDBC straight away. Now, the only concern I have about using JDBC inside of CSS, inside Liberty, if you will, is you are going from a Liberty-based application straight into DB2, bypassing the CSS DB2 interface, okay? If I do the JKicks type, I'm going through the CSS DB2 interface. So, a little bit of a choice there. JTA, Java Transaction Architecture, allows the Java application inside of Liberty Profile to coordinate with the CSS program, so that both sides of the conversation, if you will, can be backed out or committed in kind. Java persistent architectures allows us to do, storing off and recoverability of Java objects, if you will. So again, a complete Java application server with full access to pretty much anything inside of CICS. The JCICS would be command level type applications. Biggest thing that JCICS doesn't do, BMS, but we're all kind of moving away from maps anyways. So just don't have any BMS inside of there. Okay, so also kind of continue on, we have these security, if you will, big picture number 3. WAS application server has a connection to what's called an angel process. Now, I really can have multiple angels running on the same ZOS LPAR, but I do not necessarily have to do that. I can have, I can have one angel process to do the security for multiple things. For instance, if you're running the ZOS Connect, right, it has an embedded WAS server inside of it. It has its own angel process, okay? We do what's called named angels, where we can have different security angels. The whole concept of the angel process is to provide security, right, from an iShell RACF, but top secret ACF2 work just as well. So we can get complete security within the WAS, server itself. If you also have like ZOS MF running on your system, you have an embedded WAS. It has its own angel, okay? So you could take advantage of one of those other angels, or you could set up an angel process. Now, when I was doing the setup and all the testing of this, I did not do my own angel process within WAS. I actually used the one that came with ZOS Connect. I named that angel, so both ZOS Connect and CICS Liberty, Liberty inside of CICS was running using the same angel. For the most part, we don't do a lot of security on our system because it's a big test system, and we're not necessarily as concerned about, that, if you will. Okay. Okay, so again, kind of moving on here. All right. So the last kind of the big picture, if you will, again, I could have standard Java applications that are JCICS or actual Java applications talking to the CSS resources, and that would be the JCICS, or I could have Java applications doing their own thing inside of Liberty, doing nothing more than, again, JSPs, JSFs, servlets, but we can also work with all the newer stuff, JSON processing, PHP scripts, the JAX stuff, right? JAX RS is to do RESTful web services. In fact, you can get samples for WAS Liberty Profile running inside of CICS. You can get a sample RESTful service, pretty simple, but it's easy to implement, if you will. And also Java JAX WS is web services if you prefer to use the heavy lift of something like SOAP processing, if you will. Okay, so a complete, whatever you want to do, web server running inside of CICS, and also working with CSS resources directly. Okay, kind of the last page of this first little section. Basically, I just kind of listed all of the possible different components. Now, Liberty Profile does not, does not bring in all of these things at once. Okay, like Enterprise Java Beans, you have to add the support for, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit later here in the webinar, how that's done. But like all the stuff you see on the bottom of the slide, CSS TS, those are all kind of built in with the standard, implementation of Liberty that IBM supplies as part of CICS. So it can do that. With the exception of the last one, CSS standard, right? Basically is if you want to implement the full EE version 7 support inside of WAS, you'd have to add that in. And again, we'll see a bit more about that later on. So as you can see, and again, this list is nowhere near complete. This is the key or major ones that people tend to use. So we could build a complete application server. Work with IBM a lot. Used to be along to, or used to go to share quite a bit. I was on the CSS project team. Had to give that up. So I know a lot of the IBM developers, they're actually trying to position CSS to become not just a quote transaction server, but also an application server, running many different things. In fact, the new CSS 5.5, TS 5.5 does support Node.js. Just got to get it on your ZOS system. So quick and dirty, high level overview of WAS, pretty much anything you want to do. One of the newest things, again, TS 5.4, this was kind of added, JMS support. So I can actually do complete JMS applications running inside here and talk to MQ. Okay, so what do I got to change? Well, ZOS. First thing, when you install CICS, or whoever installs CICS, you get a complete set of directories and software sitting out on their USS, Unix System Services. Inside of there, you'll see this thing called Jvm Profiles. And again, I'm showing you the 5.5 version. We have 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5 on our system. So I've been working mostly with the 5.5 of late. So profiles, right? Jvm Profiles, there's I don't know, 5 or 6 of them. But the one we care about is the DFHWLP for WAS Library Profile, and then the .jvm profile. So that's the IBM sample. And again, we'll see this a little bit later here in this webinar. But that is the IBM sample, and you're going to be modifying it when you implement things. So the first thing you want to do is copy it. Now, what I did is kind of like this. And I'll explain this a little bit better, I think, later, if you will, as far as what all this structure is. You'll see a slide. But, we create a tier structure. And the biggest thing is we're going to have multiple CSS regions. So when this is going to be expanded into a complete class. I mentioned that on the last slide, you'll see. I'm working on that right now, and we're going to be doing hands-on. Okay, it'll be a day-long thing. But basically, we're going to do it multiple regions. So we have a significant thing here to delineate region. You are going to want to have this library profile, JVM profile set up for every CSS region. Many regions might be the same, but there are going to be a lot of differences you're going to see when I show you that profile there. So you're going to be copying this for every region you want to implement library profile into. So that's kind of the significance of that, right? We have unique directories for each one of our CSS regions. Now I'm going to create or show you how to create a ZFS file system, because you're going to want to have your own file system for each region. There's going to be a lot of information that gets transferred into there, basically the Java applications, because they're not going to be built on your mainframe. They're going to be built with a tool like ZOS Explorer or IDZ, something on that order, and then deployed into the mainframe. And again, you'll see a slide about doing deployments coming up, okay? But what I do show you here is you're going to work with your ZOS administrators, because once you create the file system, I'll give you the information you need to mount it. I think I said in the little abstract, don't worry if you don't know anything about USS, you'll see most everything you need to know here. I'll show you JCL to create the directories, to create the ZFS and the likes. And basically you can do it all through job control. But you're going to create a file system, but you're going to want that added to something called the BPX PRM member. Talk to your ZOS people. Now the last 2 X's there are some suffix. I don't know what suffix every site uses. We have different suffixes ourselves. But this is a mount statement that goes into that parmlib member for ZOS, so that the system gets the ZFS file system gets automatically mounted with every IPL. So I don't have to keep reminding myself, oh, I got to run a job to mount the file system. Okay, but I will show you how you can actually do that yourself. So that's the first thing we got to worry about is ZOS-wise. Now, what I have on the next several slides, I'm going to kind of go through this, some of them fairly quickly, because they're pretty much self-explanatory, you'll see. And there's text, where it needs to be, there's text in there. So this is the job that I used, or I'm using, to create a ZF file system for every one of our test CSS regions we're going to use in the class, okay? Basically, all this is on this slide is a bunch of comments, but it does show you all the steps involved, okay? So this job to be run multiple times if I wanted to recreate things, okay? So kind of moving on quickly. So the first real slide that has stuff in it, good stuff on it. Unmount. If the file system's already mounted, then the first thing you need to do before you want to do anything to it is unmount it. So this is JCL does TSO and batch and issues the Unix system command unmount whatever is file system. Again, notice the CICS TS is CICS T0.zfs, so we're going to have one for every one of our CSS regions, right? That says I can do anything I want to it. Now, I can also delete a directory. Now, if I'm running this for the first time, those two things are going to throw errors. Not to worry, you don't see conditional stuff necessarily, okay? It does reset the condition code to 0, okay? So you see the 0 LT, but we're getting Unix system errors. So I don't have to worry about it not working because the file system's not mounted or the directory's not there. Now, here's the thing. You'll notice here, okay, worthwhile explaining a little bit about the directory structure, but again, I got a little bit better diagram coming up later on, but just kind of note that I'm doing a unique directory for each one of my regions that we're going to be using. And of course, the last thing is to delete the ZF file system if it exists. And again, sets a max CC to 0, so if it didn't exist the first time around, you're setting condition code to 0. Now, so this is kind of like saying I want to build it, and let's say if I decide that maybe I made a mistake, like I didn't size it right or something like that, then I want to recreate it, okay? Or maybe I want to make it a different name or whatever. So that's kind of the thought process here. Otherwise, you don't need to do these steps, right? You only need to define the ZFS and then later on do the mount statements here you're going to see. If you have one existing, if you do this and down the road you want to make it bigger, you're going to have both of them mounted concurrently and do copies. Kind of show you how to do that coming up, okay, also. Okay, so marching on again through this, I'm going to get to the good stuff here. So then we do a define of a VSAM linear data set. ZFS file systems are now VSAM linear data sets. So I said, well, let me guess at 50 cylinders. Could be enough, may not be. For our test system, it's plenty for each one of the regions we're going to be doing. You'll kind of notice the share option 3. That's because I want to be able to, work with it while maybe Liberty has it opened. I want to be able to deploy things into it, okay? You'll see. But I also have secondary allocation. One of the nice benefits of ZFS is if I don't guess right, 50 cylinders is not enough, I can go into a secondary allocation, okay? I think I got a word of caution in the text about that when it's basically happens, right, it must be formatted. So whatever task in CICS caused the extension of this ZFS file system is going to be in a wait state, right, until that formatting is done. Happens fairly quickly. A lot depends upon the size. Preferably you want the primary allocation to be what you expect to be 100% of the time. So you don't have to go into secondary allocation unless you really, we're not given correct information. So you want it to be pretty much accurate, but if it's not, you got a little backup. But again, in CICS, the task that causes the extension is going to go into a wait for a little bit. because it's got to wait for the extension to be formatted. So should not take long to format 50 cylinders. It's not like it's got to write every record, but it's got to do a format of each track, you know, if you will. This is mandatory. This next step is mandatory for all ZFS file systems. And that's because it's a doing what's called an aggregate, so it can internally build the tree structure Unix applies properly. It does take a while to format based upon the size, so this is not something you would do. And that's kind of the format that has to go on when you go through secondary allocations, if you will. Okay, so moving on. So the last parts of this is once I've got the file system created, I then mount it. So here's the step that basically mounts it. Now you'll notice another maybe curious thing here. I purposely set the modes to 3/7. It's security bits, right? From a Unix point of view. Again, we have a test system. I don't necessarily worry too much about security. You know, we have to log on to my system and things like that, but you know, if we're teaching a class, this is all stuff that's used during the class. It's all fair game, you know, so the students, you know, could they hurt themselves? Sure. But it saves me from playing rack-if administrator all the time. So basically, that's kind of why I did that. Real world, you may not want to do 777s, right? But it will have to have the proper mode settings for the group of users that you're aiming at. Last but not least, right, is to, and that, again, that's to make dir, and then last but not least here is to mount that file system, okay? So whatever that ZFS file system, we have a mount point. So that's the other thing. The directory structure, you're gonna have to have a, what's called a mount point for each CSS region. And that's a matter of creating the directory structure. So that's why you see the make dir, right? Creates that mount point, if you will. And the last little piece, I went ahead and did a change mod anyways, okay? Even though I created a directory as 777s, I included a change mod. And again, primarily to make sure that we have the permission set to 777s, because it is a big test system, right? When I'm going to be teaching this class, it's going to be a big set of test regions. So it's not like it's anything sacred or necessary to secure, if you will. Okay. So there you got some JCL that can actually create the file system, what have you, and do all kind of other things. Now, okay, so this slide here kind of explains the tree structure. /U is a Unix standard that says this is where we could mount user file systems. Then we went ahead and then put in this themis directory, and that's because I want to be able to separate out between many different things we're doing on the ZOS side or USS side. I have separate directories in there for not just CICS TS like you see, but for DB2 we have separate for different regions, separate for MQ. Pretty much anything, you know, we need to create a user file system for whatever reasons. Right, I have the ability to create different directories all under themis. So the /U is a Unix convention. We just did this so we can have other things. Like if I install products, there may be times where I want to have under the /U, I may want to have other directories than themis that can have serve as a mount point. And again, this is just to group, the CSS TS is just to group all of our CSS regions, if you will. Within there, I have probably 30 different directories. All of our test regions, CSS T0 through CSS TJ, I think. There's like 20 there. Plus we have several other CSS regions we use for other classes. So basically every one of those has its own directory. Not all of them have mount points. You know, the other ones that are going to be used as mount points are this T0 through TJ ones that I'm going to be using. But that's the whole idea, is to have a directory structure. Now, you'll have different, probably conventions, if you will, slightly different, because you're going to have different directory structures to represent your different applications, more than likely. also for your test regions, you're probably going to have something that represents the different testing groups. And within there, rather than have a unique mount point for a CSS region, you know, well, you probably will. You probably have unique ones for every one of your, even your test regions. But the developers themselves are going to have their own home directories, something totally different. This is where it's going to start to get confusing once you start to implement WAS. You're going to see in the next section a CSS resource necessary to define the what's called the WAS Delivery Profile JVM server. Okay, you give it a name. I do not create the THM WLP directory. Okay, that is going to be created as you first start up WAS. It's based upon the name of that JVM server. So bear with me, you'll see that here in just a little bit. Okay, so that's what's going to get automatically created on your behalf, and whatever name you give to that JVM server. Okay, and that's should all be documented in the text. So again, the next slide here, set a JCL to basically copy. So this is actually a batch job that does a Unix command, what's called an O shell, but you notice the CP, standard Unix command, copy. Wouldn't worry too much about the -mp or r, take it on face value. If you want to look it up, you can actually look up the syntax of the command. But you'll notice I'm copying from USR LPP CICS TS CICS TS55 Jvm Profiles DFH WLP.jvm profile. That's the one that IBM ships with the CICS system, right? And again, if you had multiple versions, there would be a different JVM profile for 5.4 or 5.3. But I'm working now, like I said, all these regions are going to be 5.5. So, and where I'm copying it to is that directory that I just kind of created with the job, you know, the previous job, if you will, to that particular CSS region. Now, obviously, in working with a class, I'm going to have this same JVM profile copied to 20 different directories for each of the different CSS regions. But I'll have a batch job that does that kind of like in mass, not a problem. Okay, so one of the first things you will do, right, is create that CFS file, create the directory, you know, mount the thing, and copy this DFH WLP so you can start working with it to make your configuration changes that you're going to need. The last little thing sets the JCL I got for you is separate jobs. Again, pretty much the same thing you saw as a one big job, but this is a separate little job that can unmount a file system if you want to take it offline for some reason. And of course, the bottom job is to basically mount it, right, back to the particular mount point, if you will, okay? Within all the jobs, et cetera, there's pretty much everything you need to understand about USS to work with it, right? So I just want to make sure that was there because I don't know the level of knowledge you might have about USS. Okay, so move on so I can get the good stuff here. One last little thing that has to be done from the ZOS point of view, every WAS LP server is going to require 2 ports, not 1, but 2 actual ports. Now, the ones I'm showing you here are the ones we're going to be using as the primary port for the primary listener for the HTTP server. The second port that you're going to reserve is if you're going to also require a HTTPS or secured server port. So in a class, we're not going to have any particular security in place. Again, big test system, folks, right? So all I really need is a port for each WAS LP so I can handle the listen, so it can have a listener for the inbound HTTP request coming in. So every WAS LP server is going to have a report reserved. Now this is in, you know, wherever your network administrators keep what's called the profile member for TCP/IP to reserve ports. You're really gonna have to talk to them, okay? So this is just a small piece of my profile member, if you will. And as you can see, there's the 20 different regions that I'm gonna be using in the class. Those are the things that need to be you need to concern yourself with from the ZOS point of view, okay? So now let's look at CSS configuration changes. So we are going to have to make some minor modifications to the CSS JCL and SI parms. Since we're going to be using Java, we're going to have to add a DD to StepLive. May already be there, right? The documentation for installing CSS or creating regions mentions this, and a lot of people just blindly put it in. It is APF authorized, right? I guess I should have told you that. In the ZOS, it's got to be APF authorized, but it's going to go in StepLive, and it's the SDFJ auth. So it's the Java interfaces from CSS's point of view that need to be put in StepLive. Again, you may have already done this, may not have, don't know. You are going to have to make 3 SI parm changes or set them up. USS home is pointed at the base level directory for the install of CICS and the USS side. So that's why you see it ends, the parameter ends at CSS TS 55. I don't need to worry about the complete tree structure. This is basically saying for this CSS version, where is the USS home directory, if you will, okay? USS config is where I could have configuration changes. Kind of a Unix standard is to use /var. But again, I don't necessarily have to put them there. I can put my changes somewhere else, which I have done, but I wanted to mention it. /var is kind of like where you could put configurations again, /ts, and then /dfh config might be special configuration options for CICS. I don't do that myself, okay? I have it within the USS directory, that's CSS T0, CSS T1, those ones I mentioned for classes. That's where I put the DFH WLP configurations. But you could put them in a common configuration directory if you so desire. You'll see where they're going to be named anyways. One last little thing is the name of the directory, Jvm Profile dir, is the name of the directory where it can find that DFHWLP.jvm profile or other JVMs. I have different JVMs in my CSS regions, not just WLP. I have them for JCICS, I have them for OSGI, Access, right? A couple of different things. So again, I use that named directory for each of my CSS regions as the anchor point for all the profiles, all the configuration changes, okay? Rather than have a common one at the var, okay? So I must update the JCL, I must have these SI parms put in place, and then I can restart my region, right? To make it all, quote, active online, if you will. All right. So I have to do a define of a JVM server. It's really the last modification I got to make to CICS itself. You notice the name THMWLP. So whatever that name is, that's what that directory got created as. The very first time I start up Liberty or CICS with Liberty Profile implemented, if you will, or turned on, if you will, it's going to create that directory, and along with some other directories you're going to see. So I tell it the name of the JVM profile. I just kept it the same as the CICS one because it's in a separate directory, right? I make changes to, so it's DFHWLP, but it could be whatever name you want, but it must have the .jvm profile. If I can back up a couple slides, you'll notice it is .jvm profile, okay? It must have that. So whatever you call it on the first part, doesn't matter, but it must be .jvm profile, okay? There also is an LE module, DFH-AXRO, or R0, I guess, RO, that has LE options. Now, I have not changed it. You could make changes to it. I just use the one that IBM ships. No reason for me to make the changes there. So you can use a standard IBM one. There's also another way to change LE options, but this is primarily for Liberty, right, purpose. A key thing, and I'll make a note of this in a later section when I talk more about performance, but notice the thread limit, okay? What I'm basically saying is how many concurrent applications can be actively doing things within Liberty Profile and working with CICS resources, if you will, concurrently, okay? 16, arbitrary number. Don't necessarily need to define bundles, okay? Again, pardon the little typo there, it's supposed to be was LP. That's just a description anyways, comment if you will. I really don't need to define bundles. Bundles, however, are one way to deploy. There's going to be a later section where I'll talk about deploying applications. And there's 3 possible ways to do it. And one of the ways to do it is with bundles. Bundles must be defined to CICS. Now, you're not defining the actual source for the bundle. What you're defining is the directory where the bundles are going to live. So WAS Liberty Profile can find them, right? Okay, now, that's all I define in CICS. Bundles are constructed and defined, the contents of them, through something like ZOS Explorer, which is now CICS Explorer, is now ZOS Explorer, or even IDZ, right? Either one. So I'm going to define with the tool offline, and I'll kind of give you a little hint about that, like I said there. So the only reason I need bundles if I'm going to use the bundle deployment method I'll show you later on, okay? Those are all the resources I need to change in CICS. Pretty simple, right? At least as far as that goes. So now the complex stuff. So this is implementing WAS for the first time, okay? Now in that DFH WLP that you copy, there are lots and lots of parameters. Next few slides I'm going to show you are all the parameters you need to really consider about changing, okay? And some choices as far as maybe what the options are. So right off the bat, I got to tell it what version of Java is going to be used inside of Liberty as far as the actual JVM, Java Virtual Machine, and where to find it within USS. Well, the IBM installation of Java is, as you can see, USR is user file systems, or user products, I should say. IBM's convention is LPP, licensed program products, and then Java. And within the Java directory, there's, I don't know what, 5 or 4 different directories. The one that is recommended to use is the Java version 8, 64-bit. So all the JVMs are above the bar, right? As far as all their storage, heaps, and what have you, are above that bar. So that's the one that's basically recommended to be used. We then have to modify something called a work directory. And again, because this is our test system, right? Every test system is going to be used, is going to be different for the, whoever the students are. I made the working directory the same as the one, right, for each region. So the file system that I'm going to mount is not only going to support or hold the contents of all the deployed Liberty applications, but it's also going to hold anything else that we use within that CSS region. If I were to induce web services where I start to do SOAP and have to do pipelines, the pipelines, output resources would go here. The basic SOAP documents would go in the same directory. So that file system is used for everything within that CSS region, okay? Keep it isolated. Again, you'll probably have different mount points, not just for your CSS region, but you might have them different for different applications. So you might have one for the region itself, but you may have multiple mount points within there, within that region directory, T0 in this case, CSS T0, you might have different mount points for different applications, right? I don't know how big your applications are going to be, right? Could have them all within the same file system, just different subdirectories, or you could have different file systems, okay? So we now have to set timeout. Now I tell you this in there. This is the allowance of time in terms of seconds. 15,000 seconds is an awful long period of time to start up the OSGI framework. Now that is to support things like the Java server faces and Java server pages, things like that. This may look like a long period of time. Don't get too excited, folks. We use what's called an IBM ZPDT. It is emulation of a mainframe running on a PC. Okay, a lot of companies use what's called the ZD&T, Z development and testing, same thing. The difference between a ZD&T and ZPDT is I can make maintenance changes to all the operating system software, right? Where ZD&T, you can't do that. You can't maintain the operating system software, if you will. That's the only real difference. Because we emulate zips, it doesn't perform as well. So I had to bump up the timeouts, and I just made it, a ridiculous high amount of time. So the startup doesn't fail because it doesn't start up within a proper period of time, okay? The other thing I want to show you here is live path suffix. Now, the one thing we are going to be using is JDBC. So outside of accessing DB2 through CICS interface, which I could do, right? I'm going to go ahead and use a bit of JDBC in the Java applications, right? So it's going to go straight from WAS library profile inside CSS to DB2 and bypass the CSS DB2 interface, okay? Just because that's one of the things I want to test out, right? We want to deal with. So I must tell it in the live path where it can find the DB2, and this is the version 12 ones. We have DB211, DB212 on our system. So I'm telling it where it can find the JDBC classes, if you will, to support talking to a DB2 version 12. And again, this is where DB2 version 12 is installed on the USS side of the house. If I wanted to also include 11, I would have to put that there. If I wanted to include like the any of the other DLLs for JMS, I'd have to include those. I'm going to do that eventually, but right now I just haven't bothered to do that. So you are going to add in the appropriate DLLs that you're going to be using that might be part of your WAS library profile applications, okay? Your developers will have to tell you what we need. Okay, so moving on. Again, there's a lot of parameters. This is the meat of it. Install. Where is the embedded form of WAS library profile installed? Well, in my CSS TS 5.5 system, right? That would be the 5.5 main directory from the SMP install, the CSS TS 5.5. Right under there, there's a directory called WLP that gets put in place. Inside of that is the actual WAS library profile code, product, if you will. So I'm just telling it where to go find, and the product knows the subtree structure after that. I need to provide it a directory name to restore what's called shared or specific configurations. Notice it's the name of the JVM server that I define. So it's whatever the current directory is, that's the period. And then this, so it's going to go be that CSS T0, and within that you'll see the, and then within that you'll see a THM WLP directory. Where will all of the output files go? The very first time I start up Liberty, it's going to build a whole bunch of directories and subdirectories, if you will, to hold various configuration. Again, don't get too excited. You'll see some slides coming up that are going to show you those. But basically, again, within that THM WLP. Now, that says I can have multiple different JVM servers within the same CSS region. Okay, so this directory, that's why it's built by the JVM server name. So I could have different ones, and I do. I have different directories for different JVM servers, okay? Could also have multiple WAS library profiles, although that's not recommended. Auto configure true. I'm saying, hey, CSS, if you don't find a thing called JVM or server.xml, right, it's going to be in one of the output directories. But if it's not there, right, then it's going to say I want it to automatically configure things. So it's going to build something called server.xml, you'll see later on separate slides, for you based upon the options you're choosing within this DFH WLP. Okay? I gotta kind of go fast here, folks. I have limited time. But here's why I tell it to port. Please notice HTTP port 9620 or whatever port I need. Okay? So that's why you have to reserve different ports for different listeners. And again, if I needed to do also HTTPS, I'd have to have that second port. Now I am reserving two complete sets of ports for the class, although we may never implement the HTTPS one. But you need to have two different ports, one for non-secured, one for secured. Okay. I want to install the default application. That's what this says. Okay, default application app true. That gives me something I can use, you'll see, to test my implementation to make sure it's working. As a CSS system programmer, system administrator, right? You probably don't know anything about Java. You may or may not, I don't know. I do. I write Java code. But basically, I need something to test to see, did I do good? Did I make it right? You know, did it work? Default app will allow me to test it, right? And all I gotta do is issue a command, you'll see, okay? So that's the purpose of that one. Again, timeout value. This is the actual startup of WAS WLP itself, okay? We had to bump it up primarily because we have emulated zips. Most of Liberty, right, the WAS library profile is gonna run on a zip. You know, all the Java code now runs on zips. And I would say 95% of Liberty runs on the zip. So that's one of the nice advantages of it. Server name, I called mine, by the way, the default is called default server, right? The word default, lowercase, capital S, and then lowercase ER-VER. I purposely have signed a name so I can uniquely see them, if you will, from an outside resource. So I just called it server 00 for student 00. All right, we'll have a server 01, server 02, and so on. So whatever name you want, okay? But that's also going to become part of the directory tree structure you're going to see. Now, these are commented out normally, which means the Java standard, JVM standard way of doing things, or Unix standard also, is to write to something called standard out informational messages, standard error messages, and of course the JVM does tracing if you turn it on to go to a JVM trace. Those would normally be files within the file system, if you will, the Unix file system. So that I can look at them from the ZOS point of view, I have uncommented these things in that DFH WLP and have to include 3 DDs in my CSS startup JCL, DD for standard out, standard error, and standard trace, STD trace. That way I can, and by the way, I think I tell you in a text, I made them like sysout equals X, so that they're basically just spool, so I can look at it through SDSF. So I can see all the messages coming out of the JVM or WAS LP, right, without going to the Unix file system. Recommended you would do that. It saves you bouncing back and forth in a file system. JVM dump, what should the format be for a dump name? Okay. Well, that's all this is the pattern, okay? Apple ID, followed by the JVM server name, followed by the date, followed by the time, okay? So that's kind of the pattern for if it's going to put out dumps. And again, I'll show you kind of where those are going to go in a moment. There also is a special dump viewer, and I'm not going to get into it in this, but in the class we'll get into it. It's to view JVM dumps, right? Format them kind of like IPCS does for CICS dumps. Okay, so there is that, and it's part of the system. You just got to use it. It's actually a Unix command you would do, which could be done through JCL also. But you want to set up the pattern, right? That's the default, by the way. I did not change it. Okay, so looking at these directories, again, I said I would kind of give you this. So I have the THMLP, and in there, there's these, most of them are symbolic links. That's what SYML is. I wouldn't worry about the environment variables, but the biggest thing I would ever want to go into this directory for, those two files right there, current JVM log, and then that's the JVM log unique to WAS Library Profile. This is strictly messages associated with the JVM itself. So we're not talking necessarily Library Profile type messages, we're talking about JVM messages, right? So if you ever think you got an issue with JVMs, right, running inside a Library Profile or inside a CICS, that's where this stuff's gonna go, okay? Can be browsed straight away, right? If you ever do 3.17 under TSO, you can look at the entire tree structure of USS from a TSO point of view. You can navigate through the directory structure and look at the file. And if you simply do a B to browse the file, right, in front like you would for, if you did like 3.4 under ISPF to look at files, B to browse it, you would see these things clear away. Nothing fancy you got to do, okay? We'll get into some other things here in a moment. We then have the server. So there you notice the server 00. So it's going to build that server XML the first time around, okay? Now that is done in Unicode. So I actually tell you in the text, if you want to view it, you're gonna have to do VA in front of it, right? Victor Alpha. And that's because it's gonna convert it from Unicode to something you can read. If you want to make changes to server XML, you're going to do EA, right? Echo Alpha. And you are going to be, from time to time, modifying the server XML. Again, you'll see some notes about that here coming up, okay? I also created a directory called the drop-ins directory. Another way of doing deployment is what's called the drop-ins. It's the simplest way to do deployment. It also is really meant only for test type systems. I would not do drop-ins directories in production. You'll see why when I explain how it works, okay? So these are some more of the directories. Now, again, within the server 00, this is a list of files. What I want to call your attention to is the logs directory. Within the logs directory will be logs, okay? Actually, message logs. Now these are also going to be encoded in ASCII, or I should say Unicode. So if you want to look at the message logs, now these are messages from WAS Library Profile itself. So you'll see standard out, standard error are visible through SDSF. Those are just, I'll say simple messages. They're not so simple, but for a way to delineate here, simple messages. For complete verbose type messages, they're going to be here in the message log. So again, within the server directory, within the logs, right, and the server 00 is going to be unique for each server, and that's actually, right, the name that I put into the Library Profile member, setting up. To view these things, you're going to have to do a VA. Don't worry about ever editing them. There's nothing you ever want to change, but you are going to have to do the VA, Victor Alpha, to view them, okay? Caution, they're a running log. So if you started up Library Profile 2 months ago, these messages here are going to be 2 months old. The bottom will be, right, the message is tacked on. Within the logs directory, there is this thing called FFDC, first failure to capture. There's an exception summary, typically pretty brief. There's also something called FFDC log. Both of these are also encoded in Unicode. So again, to view them, no reason to ever change them, but to view them, you're gonna have to do vector alpha to be able to look at them. Okay, the FFDC will have like the stack trace from Java, things like that. Okay. State is something you never want to touch. It contains files in there that WAS Library Profile uses to help maintain state. And likewise, security, there's a file in there, but there also could be other things. These are things you never really want to bother looking at, simply because it's strictly for a WAS Library Profile to use to maintain what's going on inside of it. Within the log file, okay, there are these other logs. Do never delete them, as it says. You can view them. They're going to be in the partner log and transaction log are partner to like work with the CSS-based applications, right? Transaction log is transactional within WAS Library Profile itself. Again, these are just, you know, information keeping track of, you know, what's in flight, what's not, et cetera. You can look at the data. It's not going to make a lot of sense because there's no documentation that tells me what they are, but you never want to delete them. You never want to edit them. It's kind of like the ongoing open unit of work within inside WAS Library Profile. And the partner so can maintain, you know, coordination between that WAS application and the CSS side if you are doing like link to Liberty or link from Liberty, right? This work area there's no documentation that tells me what these are. Now, these are not just files. Some of them, one of them, the command authority is actually a directory. No information about what's here, okay? You can look at the stuff. You never want to edit it. Not going to make a lot of sense because, again, there's no documentation. Now, so that's all the structure, if you will, of Liberty Profile, okay? And that's all going to get built when you start up WAS for the very first time, okay? Now, kind of moving on, and when I start up Liberty for the first time, one of the first things I did was what's referred to as the initial or welcome screen for WAS Library Profile, okay? You notice at the top, I just simply, now it's behind my firewall because I did not have these ports open through the firewall, but I eventually will. So I had to do it from a background point of view, but 9182 is going to be a particular port I'll use for one of my regions. So basically, once WAS was started up, okay, I can simply do that. And because of the port, it goes to the listener that WAS is using, all right? That port I reserve, and it brings up the welcome screen, right? Can't do much from here, but it basically, this is the welcome screen. So that's way one, if you will, or method one to say, hey, I can actually have WAS do things for me. It's active. The default application looks like this. Now, it takes a bit of time for me to render it because, again, I don't have real zips running. I have emulated zips. But this is the default application, so it allows me, and you can see the URL string at the top of the slide. So it allows me to get a confirmation that's all working, okay? Oh boy, we're gonna go over the hour here, I'm afraid. I'll go as quick as I can. So that's all that default application. It gives me a way to verify things, that it's all in place without having to write anything. I went ahead and showed the what's called Admin Center. I have to update Server XML to do this. You'll actually see the update when I show you the Server XML here. It's not part of the initial implementation, okay? But I can create this, you know, get into this Liberty. Now this thing took about 10 minutes to start up, okay? For me to get into the Admin Center, once I did the logon, it takes me about 10 minutes to get to here. So I can maintain the server configuration from the GUI, so I don't have to be on the mainframe to maintain it. I can explore, I'll show you that, and then this WAS dev is really just access to developer network for WAS, okay? So here is the server configuration. And again, this took about 2 minutes to render this screen, okay? Again, I don't have real zips. So it's all Java code. So I can actually change server XML from here. Obviously, it needs to be secured, okay? Or you can do it strictly from the USS side of the house if you don't want to do it through a browser. But that's what the admin center allows me to do, is maintain the configuration through a browser as opposed to logging on the TSO, doing 3.17, and editing things from there. Here is the Explorer, okay? And you'll notice there you can explore the overview, you can look at the applications running, monitor or do configuration. Configuration allows me to basically add or take away applications, if you will. What I did was monitor. So there's a monitor built in, and here's what it looks like. Simple tells me the heap memory, tells me the active threads, tells me the classes that are loaded, how much storage are taken up, and of course the CPU being utilized by WAS LP itself. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. And again, I'm pretty slow on my system because you know, the emulated zips. On your system with real zips, it's going to be rendered much quicker. Okay, all of those are ways of telling me it's all up and running, fine, healthy, ready to do. So here is the server XML. Now, here's where I added admin center WebSocket app security. I did basic security, user ID password for the admin center, again, big test system. And I allowed it to modify server config so I can maintain the server.xml, right, from the browser. Those are all things I've added. The other things, you know, like these other things, CSS default app NAT, are all configured automatically. As we need to add features like JEE, we would put it into this feature manager area. We can add features to WAS, okay? So that's really the first part of server XML. And again, I put in the admin center, these last three things, and all this thing here for the access. Moving on, I also modified this. The app monitor on the second part, and I specified the directory for the drop-ins. Drop-ins is the simplest way to deploy things, okay? Again, we'll talk about polling rate here on a performance section. Yeah, I'm going over. Sorry, folks. It's a lot of information in a short period of time, but at least you got the documentation in that, okay? So here's the rest of it, and this was unmodified by me. So the server XML was built the first time I started up WAS LP, or first time I started CSS with the server defined, right? The JVM server defined and the modified profile. And then I went in and added stuff for the app admin center and then drop-ins directory, okay? All right, so adding your applications to WAS. Basically, I have to do this. I'm doing this through ZOS Explorer, typically. Now, I didn't go to the point of showing you all the building process of applications, things like that. So I have this RESTful application built, right? Java RESTful type application built by ZOS Explorer. So once I'm happy that I've got all the syntax resolved, so on and so forth, and I'm happy with all that stuff, I do a right click on the name of the directory here. It's kind of hidden because of the pop-up. I get the first pop-up. I hover the mouse over top of export. I get the second thing, and I say create the WAR file, web archive. All right, that's what you're going to deploy. Okay, so that basically says I'm going to create that. And once I click on that, I get this pop-up. So I got to give it a directory location. Here's the name of my low application. By the way, this is one of the ones that's downloadable from GitHub. It's a sample, right? And it's a simple RESTful application through, you can implement it under WLP. I browse the directory to get to a directory where I want to store the WAR file. So I have this place where I'm going to store the actual WAR file. That's all that's going to happen. I click finish, it builds a WAR file. You then take your favorite FTP tool. Mine is called WSFTP. Okay. Rather than do commands with my little fingers, it's easier for me to do this. So I have this tool, it's not free, and I've navigated the directory. Notice this is kind of highlighted, right? A WAR file. I've already connected into my Unix system and navigated to that drop-ins directory. And I have checked it so it does it in binary format. That is key. The drop-in says basically I'm going to drop into the directory the WAR file. WASLP is going to pick it up, do its thing, and now the application is instantly available. Welcome to DevOps, folks. I do not have to go to, if I do this choice, I make this choice for my test regions, your developers are going to be able to drop in their WAR files, in a sense, install a WAS application into the CSS region, into the WASLP server. You do nothing from an administration point of view. It's going to pick it up. Once it's dropped in, the WAR file's dropped in, WAS is going to pick it up and basically install it inside the server, WASLP server, and away you go. So it's meant for test systems, the simplest way to do it, but welcome to DevOps. That's what DevOps is all about, straight from development to operational, okay? But that's the key thing. You must transfer it in binary format. The last slide is you'll see it's sitting there in the directory, okay? So whatever you want to do to get it there, that's the purpose of the drop-ins directory. And again, this is DevOps, okay? And that application monitor that I modified in the server XML was the only thing I had to do from an administration point of view, right? Tell it where to go find drop-ins, okay? Second way to deploy, a little bit more controlled, I have to update server XML and physically define, right, within server XML, that application. So I have to have this web application ID, you notice it's the same one that you saw in the previous slides, and I tell it where to go find the WAR file. So I create another directory called defined applications. Def apps is defined applications, and that's where I can go find the WAR. So I still have to file transfer from the developer's desktop into a directory within USS, but this is a directory, but I must define it in server XML. The downside, every application has to be defined in server XML. I will tell you this, the moment you save server XML, WASLP is going to pick it up and reconfigure itself, right? It's actively looking for you to make changes to server XML, and the moment you do and do the save away, right? Bingo. You'll see actually in the Jez message log for CSS region, it's starting the configuration, over again, and it'll restart, and make the changes dynamically. The third way I don't give you any examples of, but it's the bundle method. Far more complex. I'm deploying jar files now, Java archives, as opposed to, WARs, okay, web archives. But I must define bundle resources. I have to do a bundle project with my, like Zetos Explorer and so on. It's a bit more complicated, but it's a bit more controlled. That might be what you would do for something like production. Because again, every bundle that gets deployed has to be predefined as a bundle resource, if you will, in CSS. What you're defining is that Java archive file itself, not the contents of it. By the way, the contents could contain even CSS resource definitions. Welcome to how we deploy the stuff. So almost done, guys. Sorry for going over. Last couple slides. So performance. Now, there used to be a SI params called max thread TCBs, but as of CICS version 5, IBM took it away. They say they're going to adjust it, but if you look at a IPCS type dump from CICS, when you look at dispatcher domain, you are going to see a value for max threads TCBs. You just can't specify it as parm. Okay. Now the reason I say that is, whatever that is, that says how many total concurrent threads can be run by JVMs under CICS. You notice the parameter I had, right? I had a thread limit of 16. So I'm saying for that particular JVM server, I can have up to 16 threads concurrently running, right, within WAS. When I looked at this max thread TCP in the dispatcher domain, it was set to 34 because I have other JVM servers running. Okay, now I don't know how they set it. There's no thing that tells me, okay? But they did it at version 5, they got rid of what's called JVM pooling. You used to have J8s, J9 TCPs, now we have T8s, right? Tango 8s. Have no way to control it, okay? Again, you want 64-bit version of Java, that's best for performance. I mentioned about the, I showed you the drop-ins, I said consider the polling rate. How frequently will WASLP look at the drop-ins directory to see if you put a new WAR file in there? In my case, 10 seconds. Make it lower, you're going to chew up more CPU. Make it higher, you delay the installation of the application from the drop-ins, okay? 10 seconds to me is not a long period of time to wait, okay? And you could make it more. But that basically says, you know, how frequently the WASLP itself is going to look for drop-ins, new WAR files, okay? And again, the thread limit is how many concurrent things can do. The only caveat that's in my text, right, is TCBs. You've got TCBs supporting the normal CICS work. These are going to be in conjunction with that. That means you're also going to possibly allow CICS to monopolize all the processors in your L part. You know, that's the other consideration. So if I set a thread limit low, right, I'm going to have applications waiting for a thread to execute within the JVM server, okay? If I set it high, I run the risk of CICS monopolizing all the processors on your L part. It's a juggling game, folks, okay? Here is the look at the exception at the top, the exception summary, right? Or no, this is the FFDC, I'm sorry. So I wanted to show you what an error might look like in the FFDC, okay? The first failed data capture file. And that's kind of what you see there. And I say, notice the message, right? So this is basically saying I did not have the registry properly set up for the admin control center. So I got a security violation, if you will. And that's kind of what this is saying, okay? Here is actually a look at the message log file. So you can actually see what, give you an idea what it looks like. Now this one here is a problem I have. When I was configuring that basic registry for the admin center, I kind of miskeyed things, right? And it's telling me, I got a syntax error for the password. So these are the kind of things you're gonna see, right, in those message files. Again, it's in Unicode format, so you must do a Victor Alpha to look at it, right? VA command to look at it. But you can see, right, here's the kind of things you might see. Well, I got a syntax error. I just can't key. Okay. Welcome to your 1 hour, slightly more than 1 hour implementation of WASLP and CICS. So in summary, I've given you everything you need to accomplish the task, right? It doesn't take long to do, but those are all the touch points, if you will. I do intend to add some of this stuff to our CICS administration courses. Again, minimal stuff necessary to do like the JVM server and things. We do have a course that, you know, I'm not fully completed yet. I'm in the process of building this right now, but it'll be a one-day course with hands-on workshops and actually go through this whole process. You know, let people do it, if you will. Make mistakes, destroy things, big test system, right? You want to see a description of that course particularly, please go to our website, okay? Just before I let it go back to David, hopefully he's unmuted now. Thank you for putting up with me for 1 hour plus. Sorry for going over your lunch thing. There's my email. If I can answer questions for you in the future, please send me emails.
Okay, thanks,
David.
Tom. Appreciate your time today, and thanks everybody for attending. As Tom said, we are in the middle of building additional course material on topics all around mainframe modernization. So keep your eyes open on the Themis website for courses on Liberty Profile and other topics that are going to be built around the modern mainframe. As Tom said, our website is themisinc.com, and if you click on the webinars tab there, you'll be able to get the slides from today's webinar. Also, in the next day or so, you'll have the replay of this webinar, and you can look through our back catalog of webinars that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years on various topics, including lots of ZOS stuff. So thanks for attending today, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.